to hear what you all say about your own titles. But today I'd like to introduce myself as a future-proofing business inspector. Good day, everyone. My name is Henu, and I am a sustainability auditor for a French company called EcoCert. And basically my job is to run around Southern Africa and to investigate or to inspect businesses against several standards. Okay. To create some context on EcoCert in Africa, so in the 1980s, an awareness started to spread across Europe that a change was needed to ensure more sustainable and healthy food systems. So this led to the creation of first regulations to help define what this would look like. So then in 1991, EcoCert was created to act as a certification body. And then in 2002, EcoCert launched in South Africa, primarily to conduct organic audits for products strongly associated with South Africa, such as wine, rooibos, and some medicinal plants. So then in 2017, EcoCert South Africa started offering its first sustainability standard in the form of Fair for Life. And this marked the start of the sustainable certification service. So then in 2020, EcoCert South Africa took over the management of all the English-speaking African countries. And this was done to ensure consistent quality audits throughout the African continent. Now, taking a step back and looking at EcoCert's global position, so EcoCert has built this reputation over the last 33 years of competence, independence, and impartiality, auditing more than 150 standards, ranging from public to private standards, and also from local to international standards. So the work done by EcoCert addressed 14 of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is done on a global scale since, as we mentioned yesterday during one of the panel discussions, the challenges of sustainability knows no boundaries. So EcoCert's global reach is made possible through 27 international subsidiaries operating in 130 countries. So this international reach really makes it possible for EcoCert to control certified products around the world. Now, getting to the actual point of today's speech is why should a business consider sustainable certification? Or, as any hard-nosed entrepreneur would put it, what's in it for me? So the first reason, third-party verification and traceability is playing an ever more important role. So we've all been there. You walk down the shops, or in the aisles in the shops, and you pick up a product, and it's riddled with sustainability claims. So much so to the point where we don't know what is real and what is not. So we see words like natural, cage-free, eco-friendly, biodegradable, but none of these claims can be proven. Now, certification, however, grants companies the opportunity to prove the credibility of their claims and to communicate this in a transparent manner. The good news, however, is that consumers with options will pick sustainable products. Why else would companies make themselves guilty of greenwashing? Access new national or export markets and earn consumer loyalty. So a study by McKinsey in collaboration with NIQ was conducted to compare the sales growth of products with and without ESG claims. So NIQ, for those who don't know, is a consumer intelligence company involved with tracking consumer behavior and market trends. So this study was conducted between 2017 and 2022, and they considered 44,000 brands with an accumulative revenue of $400 billion. And this was done through household products, food, beverage, and personal care items. So long story short, it was a lot of data that they considered. So the conclusion of this study was that consumers given a choice prefer sustainable products, and that the size of the brand had no impact on this trend. The specific claims do not have an impact, but rather the presence of ESG-related claims. And products with multiple ESG-related claims showed faster growth. So over there you can see on the graph, these different color boxes basically represents the amount of ESG-related claims, and it keeps on going up to 4 ESG claims. Now, as I was putting this presentation together, I was wondering if comes a point where this levels off and even starts going down as products start looking too good. But this is open for discussion. Okay. Need to differentiate product services from competitors. So in the last example, I used products, so this time I will use services. Now bear in mind this was in an American context, but I think the thinking still remains the same. Now 21% of the hotel industries, the hotel industry contributes 21% of the carbon footprint. Now hotels that choose to reduce this or try and reduce this are turning to certification to separate themselves from their competitors. This is because clients prefer accommodation with a kind of green awareness. So a study by Bianco et al. In 2023 came to the same conclusion, along with the point that certified businesses in the hospitality sector showed increased performance. Now this leads me to my next point. To improve the efficiency and reliability of an organization. So an article by Grant Thornton listed the top reasons why companies are choosing sustainable practices. And the top reason was for operational efficiency that comes with sustainable practices. So this comes in the form of less materials used, less waste, improved communication between supply chain links, employee satisfaction, and allows for product premiums that speed up social development. So a quote from this article that I thought really summarized this example is getting ahead on the curve of sustainability is a way of signaling the strength of your business and establishing a leadership position in your market. Increased pressure from authorities. So for this one, I'll use an example that I recently dealt with in my involvement with a standard called Fair for Life and Rainforest Alliance. So on the 29th of June 2023, the European Union deforestation regulation came into effect. So this states that all the products in that scope, along with their derivatives, before they are imported into the EU, they must have sufficient proof that they do not come from recent deforested or degraded forest areas. The point I'm making here is that standards change along with regulations. So if you are certified, you by default steer yourself clear and your business from any accidental wrongdoing. So this is also a big one that we touched on yesterday. It allows for product premiums. So product premiums are a small portion of a unit price that gets accumulated in a fair trade fund. This is then used by the employees of a company to improve their quality of life. So some of the examples that I've seen on audits is improved housing, food vouchers, solar panels, fencing, the payment of school fees, and also even housing Wi-Fi. So here I put together sort of a table that indicates all the most credible international standards for various sectors. So for those of you who haven't seen any of these labels or some of these labels, I apologize in advance because now you'll never be able to unsee them. I often find myself these days in the shops just staring at labels of products looking for new certifications. Okay, now just a quick breakdown of what it looks like, the certification process. So initially, before you start this journey, your request is submitted to a certification body, and after that there's some communication to try and figure out what's the best certification for you, seeing as there are so many. Then once you have committed, a contract is signed to prove your commitment as well to the certification body. And then they send someone like me to conduct the initial audit, which is the first audit before you get certified. So basically on this kind of audit, we check compliance of systems, practices, products, and documents against the chosen standard. Then this is submitted via report to the certification team. So then they consider my report along with any proof of compliance or in worst case scenario non-compliance with the standard. And then once they are happy, the certification team issues your certificate. So from this point on, you can display the logo associated with your chosen standard on your product, along with any marketing material. So just in conclusion, these days certification has moved from a nice to have to a must have. This is because consumers are becoming more informed. Secondly, sustainable managed businesses, regardless of certification, are better positioned for future growth and challenges. I want to use COVID-19 as an example. So in the Grant Thornton article that I mentioned, it was actually mentioned that the second highest reason why companies are choosing sustainable practices and certification is to actually guide them out of this post-COVID situation. Now, if you forget everything that I said today, that was all fine. But I leave you with this. Companies have a continued responsibility to prove that efforts are being made to constantly improve the sustainability of their activities. Certification is the ultimate accountability tool, seeing as sustainability is no longer a gimmick, but a real-world solution to very real-world problems. If any of you wanted to maybe read the articles that I used in these examples, I'm more than happy to share them with you. And then lastly, I just want to once again thank the organizers for this opportunity and each and every one of you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that presentation. Pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So a nice topic that we're going to be talking about now is holding leaders accountable. But I quite like this one because this is where it's interesting to be a part of the parenthood of the millennial and the Gen Z groupings of people, because they want accountability. They want to see change. They demand change. And you must go shopping with them. And it's actually quite refreshing, to be honest with you. You'll grab something off the shelf and they'll be like, can't take that, because this, that, and the next. And then you'll put something else in. No, you can't use that, because that's got, I'm like, oh my gosh. It's madness, but it's real. It's real. It's happening. They want change, and they want it now. And particularly when it comes for consumer patterns, that's a very big thing that I'm noticing, that they will not spend their money on a brand that they feel is not up to that sustainability standard. So I'm loving it. And my kids are very, very quick to point out and tell me, it's your fault we're in this position. Your generation did this. Now we got to fix them up. I'm like, so I walk around with a guilty complex. But it's true. It is true, because it now has to stop, and we need to do it together. So according to Deloitte's Global 2021 Millennial and Gen Z survey, millennials and Gen Z are driving accountability and sustainability demands, urging businesses to address social and environmental issues. In response, this session is going to highlight the challenges faced by the impact investors in achieving genuine impact out of this. So let me call who we're going to be speaking to up onto the stage. We've got somebody who's joining us virtually, and that's Ashley Theophanides. I'm sure Ashley will pop up in a short while as soon as we get her connection up and running. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Deloitte Africa. So that's Ashley. Then Sharan. He's also going to be joining us here on stage. Sharan, we've spoken so many times, I haven't asked you about the pronunciation of your surname. Is it Thebenilal? Oh, I got it right. Okay, good on me. So here's Sharan. Please give him a round of applause. He's Alex Forbes' representative at the United Nations Global Compact SDG Innovation Accelerator for Young Professionals. And then finally, Carolyn Burns, Compliance Officer, Leadership and Culture from Ericsson. So, Carolyn, if you don't make, there you go, here she is. All right, let's give them one more round of applause. Okay, lovely to have you. And I see Ashley is also joining us, so I can see Ashley there. Hopefully we'll pop her up on the screens once that connection's ready to go. So, let me start with the two that I have with me right in front of me. Sharon, I started off by giving an example of my children. And, oh, there she is. Hi, Ashley. You can give us a big wave. We can see you. Nice to have you with us. There we go. Okay. So, Sharon, so I'm talking about my kids and how they are demanding change. And mine is a little 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I'm seeing it happening. I was never this conscious as a kid growing up. Didn't even think about it. Is this the normal behavior that you're seeing these days? That they want change and they want it now?
Yeah. Sorry, can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, sustainability was kind of this. It was an abstract concept. It was made to seem as a problem, but it was neither yours or mine. But it wasn't someone. It was definitely someone else's.
Yeah.
Not yours and mine.
Absolutely not.
And so, as a millennial in 2024, I can fully understand the desire for leaders to be involved in the context of sustainability. But it's not just involvement that we're looking for. We're looking for a deeply rooted commitment and accountability to really push sustainable business practices that doesn't just focus on short-term gains, but also prioritizes and focuses on long-term gains.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the older generations, the previous generation, sorry, older, I don't want to offend anyone. If you look at I'm 30, by the way, just, yeah. If you look at the previous generations, they focus primarily on short-term economic gains. And a lot of the sustainability issues that we're facing today are as a result of unsustainable practices in the past. And so Gen Zs and millennials today are looking to prioritize sustainability in a way that was previously overlooked. I talked about communication and transparency, but the other thing is accountability, which is what you've mentioned now. And it's holding businesses and individuals accountable for what they say and what they do. Is what you say what you do? And if it is, then show us. And if not, then tell us, because authenticity builds trust. And so there's a greater focus on I guess, as well as, for the lack of a better word, a destigmatization on issues like mental health. There's a focus on diversity and inclusion, as well as addressing social inequality. Now, if you look at the sustainability journey, we've gone from viewing this as someone else's problem to now acknowledging and understanding that it's everyone's responsibility. And this kind of highlights the generational shift in mindset and also addresses the urgency in addressing sustainability within leadership.
Yeah, amazing. And it is true. I think your opening line was the best. You know, in our generation, it was someone's fault. I don't know whose fault it is. Not mine, but it's someone's fault. Yeah, someone's fault. But we kind of now know whose fault it is, and that's what we need to focus on. So, Ashley, I'm going to bring you into the conversation. Exactly, Ashley. Let me bring you into the conversation now, because we're speaking a lot to this whole Global 2021 Millennial and Gen Z survey that Deloitte was behind. So, what is Deloitte's impact as a responsible business on our environment and community? And perhaps you might want to go a little bit into the survey that was done so we get a greater understanding.
Thank you so much. So we are quite fortunate that this is our 12th year that we've been running the survey, and we've had over 22,000 Gen Zs and millennials who participate over 44 countries in the survey. So as you can imagine, we have quite a lot of data that we've been able to gather over the years. When we look at the results from a African perspective, it becomes even more critical to understand the results. Given that 51% of the continent's population are in the Gen Z and millennial bracket, and that is incredibly important to understand their thinking, to understand what's important to them. And then just as an employer, I mean, with over 80% of our workforce being Gen Zs and millennials, understanding how we attract and retain the best talent on the African continent is absolutely critical. Now, if you can think about it, that there are various ways in which one can bring these different elements together. And one of the things that we realized is that we need to understand what this next generation of leaders are thinking about. We need to understand what perspectives they have and how we can harness that energy. And we therefore formed what we call the Next Generation Council, which is a advisory council and a sounding board that our African executive uses in order to consider some of these strategic challenges as well as opportunities. So as you can imagine, in the past, you would have your executive sitting around the table, unpacking opportunities for growth, identifying new trends. Let's think of Gen AI. How is that going to transform the workforce? But now we actually have the opportunity to bring the council in order to get their perspective and give relevance to the type of things that we do. In addition to that, what we've realized is that getting some of those broader strategic initiatives is important, but having an opportunity for the Next Gen Council to act as mentors to the executive team is incredibly important. So we have a reverse mentorship program, and we've been fortunate to run it now for 2 years. And I must be honest, I've been able to participate in this, and I have found it incredibly insightful, being able to get a perspective from the younger generations in terms of not only what are these new trends, but also how do we continue to hold ourselves accountable, and how do we ensure that sustainability is on the top of the agenda, as we know that these themes are incredibly important. The other thing that I'd like to highlight is that sorry, there's a little bit of background noise. I don't know if you can hear me. One of the additional elements that we've also been able to identify is that when considering these different elements, it is vitally important to be able to understand how societal change, being clear about purpose and opportunities to address these societal issues, can be brought into the work that gets done. When looking at the results of the survey, we see that less than half of the Gen Zs and millennials believe that we are making enough of a positive impact on society. And 6 of every 10 Gen Zs and millennials believe that most organizations' ambition is mostly focused on money or on profit. So finding that balance is incredibly important, and holding businesses accountable in terms of the type of work that they do, the organizations that they work with, as well as the choices in terms of where they invest their careers, and their ability to bring those different elements in is critical important. Now, of course, understanding these dynamics are crucial, but there's also responsibility on the millennials and Gen Zs to ensure that they continue to educate themselves around sustainability and around sustainability issues in order to ensure that the way in which this gets implemented into the work that we do, into the way that we show up, as well as the way in which we bring various aspects from a sustainable development perspective into the choices that we have to make, is of critical importance. I mean, one of the things that's always top of mind for me is that often we have this disconnect between the global north versus the global south. And when looking at Africa, we have 600 million Africans without electricity. And that, of course, has a significant impact on our ability to grow economies and to create economic activity. So finding a balance between providing energy security while still ensuring that all the other sustainable development goals are managed and measured in a cohesive way is of critical importance.
Ashley, thank you. I think giving us a really good perspective as to where we're at and how this works. So now let me bring in Caroline into the conversation, because I've seen Caroline sort of listening intently and also when Sharon was speaking as well. Let's sum up how you feel about this whole conversation that we're having as well.
So, I mean, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm a compliance officer, right? So I come from a different side, right? So I see sustainability more than green. For me, sustainability also means human rights.
Yeah.
Ethics, right? Ethical behaviors, etc. But of course, absolutely what you're saying. So we don't just have the younger generations asking for that we recycle bottles, but they also ask for ethical behaviors in companies. They ask for making sure that people are being treated fairly. You mentioned D&I earlier, right? I mean, the whole focus on this, that is really what's driving it. It's not just the consumers, but we of course also see this from a talent point of view, right? If you're a company that is not sustainable in that sense, or that is unethical, etc., people don't want to work for you, right? They actually they just ignore you, and I think that's so important also for leaders to understand, right? And of course, I mean, there are lots of other things that are impacting this, right? But this is my angle.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I really do. How adamant these generations are. Change must happen.
Yeah.
Let's perhaps talk about this. I mean, when did this happen? How did this happen?
Okay, so and I'm also sharing a little bit my age here, but I actually grew up being an activist. But I grew up in Germany, so you hear my accent, right? So I was active in both human rights organization as well as also renewable energies. But back then, it was so hard. I mean, we met in a library every 2 weeks. Emails were like, one person had an email, basically, right? I'm that old. I'm sorry.
Disappeared.
And it was so much harder to organize. So even the generation that wanted to do something, or the people that wanted to do something, wasn't possible, right? But of course, what we've seen in the past years, I mean, we have the SDGs, right? That made a huge impact. We see this more and more coming now from the US, from the EU. That has a huge impact. But, and I want to say something, and had a very good discussion with a lady at the back earlier. There's, for example, the new law for the supply chain, the new EU law for supply chain, right? It was just passed. But the original law was so complex, and they really wanted to hold the leaders accountable, right? Basically, the executives could be incentivized for running a sustainable practice, for following the, everything. It's not happening anymore. They took it out. They were scared, they took it out, right? And those are the areas where I'm thinking, where are our younger generations to ask for this and really demand and say, what you got away with this is a third of the original act, what you wanted to put through. Now we are sitting there. Of course, it will still help us in that sense, and it will drive change in Africa as well, because even if you're not in the EU, the second you supply to the EU, you will be impacted by that. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons. Then, of course, a big change is technology. I told you, right? We didn't really have, we had an email maybe, but we didn't have social media. And what you can see now on the activism that is supported by social media, that is amazing. And I really like this, to see how this can drive generations forward. And of course, what you also said, that can remind people to continue with this, right? Not just lean back. And the other thing is, of course, that we can now measure data, we can track data, and that is so important. You cannot just lean back anymore and say, oh, I don't know, I just feel we are sustainable, exactly. Right? But now you actually have to prove this. And with that comes that big accountability as well, right? Of course, if the laws are not really pushing your leaders to be accountable, it's the one thing. But the young generations can do this and say, I'm reading your sustainability report here. I don't see this. I stopped buying your product. Right? Yeah. Or I'm not going to apply to you. So, yeah, long answer short.
and a very good answer at that, because, I mean, those are more than enough reasons as to why there is, and I'm sure there are many more, but why there has to be change and why the demand is there, because now suddenly there's accountability. And as we said in one of the previous panels, is that it's got to hit where it hurts the most, and that's in the pocket of any corporate, and they get very much so for that. But Sharon, let's look at perhaps companies, and now I'm asking a really off the beaten track question, but I mean, are there practical examples of a company that perhaps didn't comply or listen to a consumer and say, like, you know, I don't care, I'm going to carry on the way I've always carried on, and that was detrimental to their business, because there is genuinely that shift to not want to support those kind of people?
So I think with investments, there comes. I'm in a legal and a compliance team in Karina's team, and non-compliance with regulatory frameworks can result in massive fines. It results in reputational damage, and it's so important that you ensure that your legal and your compliance obligations are being met as a result, and. Yeah, sorry, that's.
Yeah, which is important because you know that there are going to be repercussions if you don't follow through on all of that. Maybe you want to add your voice into that. I mean, you may have seen some practical examples of things that have gone horribly wrong.
I don't want to call out any companies.
No, please don't. Please don't. We saw what happened last time.
There are companies where people really stop buying products, right? Because they're not sustainable. And there is, for example, and that's something related to water, related to baby milk, for example, things like this, right? Where I'm sorry, you know who I mean, right? But I know a lot of people who just stop buying products from this company, and this is exactly that, right? They're saying I cannot align with this is unethical behavior, I stop buying from them. We saw this a lot with Russia, when companies stayed in Russia and people stopped buying from these companies, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of companies who were impacted or are impacted by this, and I hope they listen.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going at, is that there are repercussions and corporates need to step up. And it's not only about, as you say, the legal compliance and the money side of it, it is also that the consumer is much cleverer than we think they are. They really, really are. But Sharon, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about impact investing and how this is shaping sustainability.
So impact investing is essentially the socially woke version of traditional investing, where traditional investing primarily focuses on financial returns, whereas impact investing focuses on marrying impact goals with the value proposition. And so I think impact investors have an opportunity to really promote social and environmental responsibility by investing in companies that are driving sustainability, that are implementing sustainable practices at the core of their businesses.
Yeah. And let me come back to you, Ashley, as I know you joining us virtually there. What are the challenges that impact investors face in achieving genuine impact?
Thank you. So, I mean, I do think that very often when investments are selected, being quite clear in terms of what the outcomes are that one's looking to achieve through that investing is incredibly important. And sometimes the timelines associated for achieving that level of return or the change from a quantitative or qualitative perspective needs to be considered. So, for example, if an organization looks to implement investments from an education perspective, we know some of that real change will take a very long time in order to achieve and to become visible. I also believe that there is various demands on organizations, both in terms of their shareholders looking for returns in a shorter period of time. There is, however, the stakeholders such as advocacy group, regulators, and other organizations, including governments, looking for opportunities in order to ensure that there is greater alignment. The way that I would look at it is that from a sustainability perspective, one would want to create harmony in order to have an environment where you have harmony from a natural capital perspective, from a social capital perspective, and then financial capital. And creating that balance from a timeline perspective, as well as from a broader social perspective, is incredibly important. The other aspect to potentially consider is how one takes these investments and rather than looking at them as bolt-ons, so having them as investments that sit in a separate portfolio and that doesn't necessarily get the level of focus the level of integration into the broader organization may result in lower levels of outcomes compared to having it integrated into one's overall investment structure, because by having it being a deliberate, intentional, well-structured approach in terms of how you incorporate it into your core businesses will result in far greater alignment with one's strategy in order to achieve an organization's purpose, whether that is to drive economic growth by providing some of their products. And we've seen organizations really looking at their own purpose in terms of their reason for existence. Why do they exist? And if they can use their impact investing and a mechanism to enhance that purpose and that reason for existence, it is just so much more effective in order to ensure that through the ups and downs of implementing many of these investments, one can actually achieve those outcomes, but also that one can bring together a number of organizations, especially those that can support you in order to address some of the African challenges that we know about, such as education, access to water, energy security, and the likes, which often requires more than one organization to work together in order to achieve it.
I'm glad you leewayed into the Africa conversation, because that's what I want to sort of start dwelling on and then hopefully wrapping on that point as well. So, Caroline, let's talk about the impact investing in Africa if we have to look at it in comparison to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, the scope is different, right? We have market maturity, rest of the world, or not rest of the world, but what we're saying, the global north, for example, we don't really have that here in many areas, right? Then there's a big thing, and that's something that I really care about, and I've unfortunately experienced this working with Europe. And I mean, I've been in South Africa for 12 years now, right? And I work in a global role, but I used to work sub-Saharan focused, is that perception, the perception of corruption, the perception of no talent, the perception of everything, basically, right? And that constantly having to educate. And this is, of course, also if you have impact investors who come from Europe, for example, they have this perception, this won't work in Africa because they're all corrupt, or this won't work in Africa because this, right? Then the other thing is, and that was such a strong statement yesterday someone made on a panel, was, sorry, I wrote it down, I don't care about the planet, I care about survival, right? And the focus areas here is, of course, for a lot of people is completely different. And that, for people to understand, right, and not come in was that European or American focus and say, we want to do here now what we've been doing here and this will work. That is so important. So I think having that understanding, right? Then, of course, we have a lot of actual risk, right? I mean, from a regulatory point of view, government instability, etc. That's also what companies have to understand, or investors have to understand. There is very little protection for them. So if something goes south, maybe they're not going to get their money back, right? Those things. We have, of course, challenges with. So I'm just thinking. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. There is also limited access to capital. So if you, of course, have great innovation here, great, someone does something, they don't really have that local capital. So it's also harder for them. So for the impact investor coming in from outside, also that understanding that this works differently. Yeah. But I'm sure you can add a lot of.
Yeah, Sharon, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, so I want to actually look at it from the other side. I think that Africa presents a vast. I want to say it presents enticing, for the lack of a better word, opportunities to impact investors, considering our vast potential for impact, considering our natural resources, considering that we have renewable energy, considering that we've got a need for sanitation. There's a large percentage of communities across Africa that are currently underserved. And so I think it does provide a massive opportunity for impact investors to invest. And I also think that because there's so many of these areas of potential investments, it also presents greater opportunity for investment diversification. So it provides investors a higher probability or a higher likelihood of finding an investment that aligns with their financial and their value proposition.
Interesting. And it is the Africa story is a very interesting story to tell. And I think the comment you made was that you picked up on yesterday, because it is, you hear that being said a lot, especially when we want to do the transition from coal into renewable energy. And then you get entire communities that are going to be decimated.
Exactly.
And this is the reality, is that, okay, great, I'm happy for you that you've got your renewable energy, but at the same time, how am I going to eat? What am I going to do? These are towns that have had a history of coal mining since back way then, and that's all they know how to do. And that's real. The Africa story is a very difficult and different story. So perhaps we can talk about, maybe there is a role that Africa can play in shaping impact investment. I don't know who wants to start. Ashley, shall I begin with you? Do you want to perhaps take that?
Thank you. So, firstly, I mean, I echo all the comments that were made by Caroline in terms of being able to create opportunities from an African perspective. So, when considering Africa and how we can potentially bring this home, I do believe that when reflecting on the various forms of investment that's currently happening, we already see that there are many development agencies that are doing a lot of work from a just transition, urban resilience, healthcare, water and sanitation. And these type of initiatives create a really strong opportunity for initiatives such as public-private partnerships. And if we can create these opportunities by bringing development aid, companies, private companies, and of course there are certain risks that have been highlighted by Caroline, and I think they are real for these organizations. But if we can bring ecosystems together in order to get government, the private sector, as well as these development agencies to work together, we have a real opportunity for success. We also, of course, have the workforce of the future here in Africa. We have opportunities for investment in renewable energy, given the fact that sub-Saharan South Africa is probably one of the best places in the world for renewable energy production. Can you imagine us being a net exporter of energy in the future? But of course, that transition of getting our youth and maximizing on the youth dividends, which I don't think we've been able to do thus far, being able to use this need to transition to take a more holistic systems approach to the way in which we approach it. So we have educational challenges, we have employment challenges, we have energy security challenges and the likes. If we can create mechanisms to bring these different elements together, it can create real change. And one of the examples of that is if we look at South Africa in terms of our high level of unemployment, specifically in the youth, if we can get them involved in producing renewable energy solutions, being PV installers, for example, within township economies, we are able to create employment, we are able to create energy security, and we are able to create a different path while we transition to a greener environment, while addressing more than one of the Sustainable Development Goals in a more holistic as well as more collaborative way.
Lovely. Nicely put, Ashley. Thank you very much. Caroline, let me give you sort of a wrapping moment there. Sum it up for us.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I never meant there is no potential here. It's the opposite, right? But of course, as a compliance officer, you understand, we see the risks. So, and for me, the big thing is, and that's also one of the reasons why I am here in Africa, is the innovation and the entrepreneurship and the young minds here, right? So what we see here, and that is so important that we keep this, that we foster this, and exactly what you were saying with youth, unemployment, etc. There's so much what we have to do, but there is so much potential. We just have to do it correctly. We just have to do our due diligence. The investors have to do their due diligence, so we do not harm people while we do this, right? But the potential is absolutely there.
Fantastic. Sharon, do you want to wrap it up for us? Let me leave the word with you.
No, I've got nothing else to add. I think They've taken the words right out of my mouth, and I echo everything that they've said.
Okay, fantastic. Good. Well, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. Let's hear it for our panel. We've got Sharon, we've got Caroline, and Ashley joining us remotely. Thank you so much, guys. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so with that, we move into our next discussion. And this discussion, I think, was touched on, I perhaps touched on a little, very, very briefly in terms of mining. And particularly here in a country that, we're so used to things like coal mining and all the other things like that. And now, how do we shift and get to renewables? And besides all of that, there was also the example of a lot of international companies coming into Africa, working here, finishing off their mine and leaving it in a desperate situation. Well, let's talk about future smart mining. And the question is, what is the mining industry's role in the race to net zero? So this should be a very interesting one. And to help us unpack this, we've got Agisan Rajagopal. I hope I got your name right there, a partner at McKinsey & Company. And we've got Rajan Govender, the Managing Director of Weir Minerals, also joining us on this panel. As I say your name, please make your way up onto the stage. Then we've got Busisipo Siobi, the Head of Program for Natural Resource Governance at Good Governance Africa, and Maria Combrink, the Principal Consultant, Data and Governance, ERM, and Deputy Chair of WIMSA. So let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you. Come, have a seat. Okay, wonderful. I see we're missing one panelist. I'm not sure. Is she not joining us? Okay, good. Thank you. So, Agisan, we've got you. Rajan, we've got you. And we've got Maria. So lovely to have all of you here. And thank you so much for these inputs that we're about to hear from you. Agisan, let me begin with you. What role does the mining sector have in this race to achieve a net zero future?
Thank you, and great to be here, and I think this is an exciting topic. I do a lot of work in mining across the world. And just to the question you asked, I think first and foremost, the net zero transition cannot happen without the right metals. So if, for example, if you look at renewables and you look at solar, which I think we all know that's a big part of the journey towards net zero. If you look at electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines, big part of the journey. Solar panels, for example, require 4 times as much metals, 4 times as much copper as, for example, coal-fired power generation. Electric vehicles require 2.5 times more metal than internal combustion engine vehicles. So, of course, these are all metals that are mined from the ground, some recycling as well. So mining will play a big role in helping to achieve that. But there is a big challenge in being able to accelerate and develop the supply in order to meet such demands.
Yeah.
To replace all of that high carbon intensive power. And I think the second thing is that the mining industry and its value chain is a big contributor to emissions as well. So there's a big part that the industry will have to play in also decarbonizing its value chain. And of course, if you're going to use copper in an electric vehicle and say that electric vehicles are reducing carbon, you can't have the metal itself having used coal power for its production. So that's the second big thing and the role that mining can play. And I think the last thing is you have to look at, I'm just linking back to the previous discussion, on all the other elements of sustainability, communities, water, local communities, as we said, safety. Those elements have to be in place as well from the mining industry in order to be part of the decarbonization journey as well.
Right, interesting. I like that. Maria, what would you say are the challenges in reducing the mining sector's environmental impact, though?
Well, I think everybody goes to technology as this magic bullet to sort out all of the problems that we might have in sustainability going forward. However, it comes at a cost as well, because when we look at technology, it's new technology, so it's implementation of new things like new water purification systems, new land reclamation techniques, or electrical mining equipment, which is not does not come cheap. And then added to that, you also have to get stakeholder buy-in. You have to get the people on site and in the production line to also want to buy into that, which also brings in a lot of time and people management associated with it. Then I think one of the things that doesn't get enough airtime that it should is legacy issues, especially in the South African and African context, where we have a lot of mines that are now new ownership mines, but they still have to clean up the mess that the previous people made. Yeah. And they also have the bad PR associated with the previous contingents that were at that mining area. Then, as we rightly touched on now, energy dependence. A lot of the mining machinery is still energy dependent on fossil fuels. And I think to change to a renewable source is not an overnight cause. And yes, we're working towards it, but to really focus on driving that, even just moving from a cleaner fuel, from a fossil fuel to a cleaner fuel, you also have infrastructure implications associated with that. So it's not just as easy as saying we're going to move from diesel at the coal face to electrical at the coal face, because all of the infrastructure systems associated with that also needs to change. Yeah. And added to that, we have commodity volatility, we have uncertain supply-demand chains, and we have the supply chain dynamics that goes into that as well. And as we all are quite aware, mines aren't built where cities are. So there's a lack of rural development, urban development in these rural areas. So mines already start with where they have to look at infrastructure deficits and building infrastructure to be sure to be able to operate at the areas in that area. And then also added to that is regulatory and policy uncertainty, which can cause disruptions and delays, as governments might not always be as upfront and transparent with their policies. Mm-hmm. Then in environmental and social concerns, there's always this play between what is more important when both are actually quite important, but mining houses are businesses after all and still have to look at the bottom line too. And then, of course, the geopolitical factors that come into play. Everybody's looking towards Africa as this new workforce, but upskilling and reskilling is also a costly outlay for that. Yeah. And then the last thing for me, especially in the South African context, is illegal mining. I'm not talking about legal artisanal small-scale mining. Illegal mining, the DMRE estimates that there's over 14,000 people currently involved in illegal mining in South Africa. And illegal miners do not care about your environmental impact assessment or your policies or your local community. I think that is one of the issues that really needs to be addressed as well.
That's a very important issue, and I'm glad you did mention that one. And I mean, we're not talking about your little zamas, is what I'm gathering. You're talking about on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, yes, it's actually the zamas that you see. So I worked underground as well for quite a long time. So when you see them, it's like you don't really see them. You just see the effect underground, and they're just the tip of the iceberg because they work within larger networks and larger syndicates, and it is really a problem. And there must be political and industry will to really take on this problem.
Sure. Rajan, let's bring you into the conversation because it's an interesting point to sort of live literally on a cliff's edge here, but perhaps you can incorporate it into, some of the things that you say. There are sustainable mining practices, obviously, that are happening already. That goes without say. But perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this, but also the issues that they're facing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe at the outset, a disclaimer. I'm not a thought leader on the subject. I'm just an employee of an organization that supplies equipment solutions and technology to the mining industry. But having said that, I spend a lot of time on mine sites, sitting with mine managers and sitting with C-suite management of mining houses. For me, I think what's encouraging and I've been cursed with being an eternal optimist. But what's very encouraging is the fact that we're seeing the narrative changing.
Good.
Right. So when we used to meet with mining companies before, a standard agenda item was safety. It's on every company's agenda. The first subject is safety. We spend an inordinate amount of time talking about safety because it's important, right? What has been a shift in recent months or years is that sustainability is now accompanying the agenda as a standard item. And this is across the patch. So, and it's not just a tick box approach, it's about a real good, intense narrative about what we can do as suppliers into the mining industry, how do we help each other, but also as suppliers into the mining industry, we're being held to account. It's almost the discussion around what are we doing from cradle to grave around sustainability, around recycling, and what energy are we saving, what water are we harvesting and using less of, and what else we're doing in the manufacturing process, because we all know, as we said before, the world needs more mining, not less mining.
Yeah.
And it is our responsibility to do that with less destruction and less energy and less water and take care of all of the elements around and all the stakeholders around the mine itself. So I think, as suppliers, we spend a hell of a lot of money on R&D to support the mining change, to support the change that we're looking at and we're wanting. So we need to use technology and innovation. And the one thing I want to say, and that I've found very encouraging, and Sharon, I am one of those people that we call BBC, born before computers. I'm not a millennial. I have 2 millennials at home, and they teach me everything that I need to know. The reality is that, for me, ID&E equals IC&E. That is innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurial spirit. If we get everybody on the same journey, mining is but only one part that we will influence as far as sustainability is concerned. I think also going further, if we look at what do we need to do from a mining perspective, clearly mining is broken up, and again, I'm not an expert, but clearly mining is broken up into a flow sheet. And the flow sheet has extraction, comminution, which is crushing, mill circuit, it's transporting slurry on the mine site, and then of course finally tailings. As you all know, and I knew growing up in Johannesburg, mine dumps, right? That's tailings. What we need to do in the process of supporting the mining industry is in the extraction process, we need to move less rock. Right? How do we do that? Technology, mechanical technology, digital technology, innovation. Comminution, the crushing process. How do we use less energy? I'll give you an example. We use what we call HPGR, high pressure grinding rolls. They use 40% less energy in the crushing of ore. Okay, mill circuit. It's something that's very topical for us in the African continent, and that is water. How do we use less water? And in fact, how do we use less water, but also the water that we use, how do we recycle that water? So I think those are important points that we need to consider. And then lastly, in terms of tailings, in creating the tailings, is to create less waste. Creating less waste, using more drier stacking or tailings processes, over and above the obvious safety risks, it is also, from an environmental point of view, a lot better than normal, traditional tailings processes.
So important points as well bringing up here, but Augustin, I want to move it a little bit further as well, because I want to look at the communities that are living in these areas. And this, I think, is a big problem. We can sit and talk about how we envision things should be done, and how the African mining industry, and that's what we're focusing in a lot on, is Africa and the mining industry. But how do we engage with the local communities? Because there are indigenous people that live there. There are civil society organizations that are there to ensure that they have a voice and they actively participate in all of this. And as much as we want to shift to renewables and become, much greener and better on the environment, sometimes it is to their detriment and they don't understand it. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about the communities that are living there.
Yeah, I think this is an important point, and you touched on it in the previous panel as well.
Yeah.
so a few things here that we need to start from. So one is, if you look at the you take a customer back approach for the mining industry, and the customer is a few steps down. If it's someone who's buying a car or someone who's buying jewelry, there's so much transparency in the whole supply chain and value chain now. And if you talk about the next generations, people getting married, whatever, buying engagement rings, they need to understand that that metal and that diamond was not impacting environment, but also community.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, will get even more and more pressure, more and more intense. And who knows? And I think mining companies, some of them are trying to comply today, but some of the leading ones are trying to say what could happen in the future, what could the market expect. And that's where community health, community sustainability will become a part of it. And we've actually already seen it in some products where customers in Europe, for some of the supply chains and customers of some of these metals in the automotive sector would say, we're not going to buy from that mine because it came from that community and that community was negatively affected. We've seen that, and it could be more. So that's the one thing, which is a very commercial view of the world, capitalist view of the world. I think the second thing is, one of the big problems is that mining companies have, or communities have been too reliant on the mine.
Yeah.
And this is where that tension has been created over decades. Mines are old operations in many communities, 10 years, 20 years, even longer. You talked about coal. I mean, some of those mines are decades old.
Yeah.
And so there's been a reliance, and the reliance creates tension. What's happening with coal becomes an issue. So mining companies have to plan ahead, have to think beyond mining, and how can they help to sustain and create other opportunities for the community. And I think that's where it goes beyond, of course, building a school, building a hospital, sorting out the water infrastructure, all those basic needs of a community are important. But it needs to go beyond that. It needs to go towards adjacent industries, agriculture. It needs to go towards the supply chain. I think many mining companies see spending in the local community as just okay, we'll just spend to tick the box as a percentage of our spend. It needs to be, well, how can we get more of that supply chain in the local community? Because that will make them more sustainable. Maybe they can supply other mines.
Yeah.
Maybe they can, supply other mines in other areas. So for me, these are they need to think more competitive, more holistic, and less reliance. And then the last thing I would say is mining companies seem to have a template. Okay, we'll just go to every community and do the same thing. But not all communities are the same. They all don't need the same things. Yeah. You need to understand the dynamics of these communities, the networks, the stakeholders much better. What exactly do they need? And very few actually go and figure that out, understand that, and then create the right strategy for that community.
Indeed. I can see the smile on your face. This is where I know you'd like to come in and comment. So go for it, please. Mira, what do you think?
I definitely agree there, because the first thing, when you're engaging with a community, you have to be transparent and open about what's going to happen. You must be saying, this mine, it's only got a life of mine of X years.
Yeah.
And then you have to do a community needs assessment, which speaks to this 100%, because it might be wonderful to set up 3 broileries outside Klerksdorp, and it works there, but maybe 3 broileries outside Kathu is not viable. So definitely speaking open and honestly with the communities, but also get open and honest feedback with the community. And then also ensuring that there is a benefit sharing agreement between the mining company and the community, so that, for instance, if it goes well with the mine, the community will benefit as well. And that ensures that they start looking after the mine as well. And not only a person or 2 people in the community, but the community at large. Because I'm a firm believer in transformation done right is right for everyone.
Yeah.
So if you come in and you do it properly from the get-go, then, but if you haven't done it properly, it's not too late. You can still have those open, honest, and meaningful conversations with the community.
And you see how abused these communities are, and that's the reality. It really is. So, Rajan, please stop me if you're not the right person to speak to this about, but I'm still in my head wondering, what Maria was saying about illegal operations that are taking place and things like that. But my question, a lot broader than that, is what measures can actually be taken to ensure that mining activities in Africa adhere to international standards and that there's transparency, that there's accountability, that there's responsible resource management in this context, obviously, of achieving net zero emissions. How do we manage this better?
You're definitely right. I'm not an expert in that, but I've never shied away from a challenge. So I'll give it a shot. But I think going back to the previous two speakers, I think the reality is it starts at day dot. We need to manage expectations. I think what happens very often is we start the process and we start making huge promises that we know within ourselves we're not going to be able to maintain or deliver on. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is clearly we also need to make sure that, similar to what Ageson was saying, is that we need to create secondary and tertiary economies around the mine that do not need to be sustained by the mine themselves. Right? So I think that's critically important. But I think the cornerstone, and I think there's probably no better example than the African story, and in more particularly the South African story, it actually all starts and ends with education. Right? What we're forced to do in many instances is to partner with communities, and they're disempowered at the very beginning because if we bring highly technologically advanced, highly engineered equipment into a mine and we're forced to then partner with the local communities, we're going to fail and they're going to fail. But it's the drive to education, it's a drive to support and carry them along in that journey to make sure that we're putting proper sustainable practices in place to maintain the equipment, the technology, and the solutions that we put in place.
And it's the investment in skills, because, at the end of the day, you bring all of this stuff in, and yet the community they don't know how to deal with that. So, the responsibility of skills transfer, and do we have the right skills? I don't know if you want to perhaps address that as well.
Absolutely. I think as leaders, it's incumbent on us to do that, right?
Yeah.
We have the resources. We probably have the energy, despite being old. But we have the know-how and the will to do that. I think it's incumbent on us. I mean, I'll give you an example, perhaps a case study. For the longest time, we're operating in the African and Middle East continent, African continent and the Middle East. And for the longest time, every effort that we made around skills development, we saw Johannesburg as the center of the universe, right? But we did work in the rest of the continent. Until one day I woke up and I said, what about graduates for the rest of the African continent? And I had lots of resistance from many people in the business. And I said, well, I want it to happen, make it happen. Yeah. 5 years later, we've had many graduates come through our program. And in fact, we're on the precipice of appointing a female country manager in Ivory Coast as a result of the graduate program. We need to take the lead.
Yeah, I like that. I really, really do. Anyone want to add to that? Go, Maria?
Sorry, yes, I would like to add to it. I was quite heavily involved with a project in Botswana, and to get a work permit in an already highly skilled mining environment, you have to nominate a Botswana person that you will be training. And then at the end of that project, you actually have to hand in a portfolio of evidence of what you have done for training in order for the company to, in future, get a work permit again. So there becomes a responsibility. You can't just say, yes, I'll train them. You now have to prove I've trained them and they can do what I'm doing now.
And that's what you need. You need this giving back kind of thing.
Can I
please.
add one thing that
I want you to add on there.
Because I fully agree on the skills and education point, and I think the one thing, because we're talking future smart mining, in the future, there probably will be less people working on the mine, but more of the jobs outside the mine that support it.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? That doesn't mean they're all going to just get jobs. That means entrepreneurship, small business, even more important. And that sometimes is more than just education and skills, although it's a base for it. But it's also the hustle, the proactivity, the creativity, the try, learn, fail, try again mentality, right? And that's something that is not always there. And so I think there's something there as well in how we and the corporates can create that, lower the risk a bit, create the opportunities for it. But I think that needs to be the balance as well.
Yeah, a big balance. And I like as well what you're saying, because it is amazing. You hear that all the time. It's going to be less under the ground and more on top of the ground. But you brought up something right in the beginning, and this is a bugbear of mine, is that the whole world is obviously looking for solar and energy and all of these kind of the panels that we put on our roof. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is not one single solar panel that is manufactured in South Africa. I mean, and that is in demand, you know, and I know we use mining for that. And that's a problem, is that we tend as a continent to get abused by mining that happens here, it's taken away, then it's produced and we have to buy it back. It's a conversation we've had forever. But how do we get around this? I mean, we need to focus more on skills, I imagine, and skills management at every single level.
And this one, we actually did some research on this a few years ago to look at, if you look at the net zero transition for South Africa and our targets, if we went slow, what would happen? If we didn't do it, you know, we'd still remain with coal, and that's understandable. We could go slow, and then we would just be building solar, wind later on in a slow way.
Yeah.
But if you did it fast, and you think about all the value chain, the supply of products, components into the solar, that's where, if you do it fast at scale, then you can build some of that manufacturing here, or you can do the right deals with some of the equipment players to include that there, because that gives you a bit more negotiating power, leverage, all of that. So that's the thing we learned. So this is a net job discussion, actually, not a net zero discussion, because if we do it slow, we might lose jobs because of coal mining being much more employment intensive than renewables. But if you add the manufacturing part, if you use that as a strength, and you do it fast, you could, I don't know if we'll replace all the jobs, but we could add new jobs.
Yes.
More advanced jobs, higher wage jobs.
Yes.
So that's what we need. That's what we need.
That is exactly.
That speed and integrated picture of the value chain.
And that is very, very important. So I'm going to wrap it up. I can see that you've got a point to make on that, Rajan, and anything else you'd like to sort of add as you give us your closing statements.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add to that. I think, you know, the transition in terms of skills to more technology-driven process, even in mining, and employment, are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It's how we plan for it, right? And I think it goes back to the African proverb that says, if we want to go fast, we'll go alone. But if we want to go far, we'll take our people with us. And I think this is one of those places where we take our people in that transition, in that skills development, train them up for other jobs. And I think that would be the answer.
Are we moving fast enough, though? That's my question to you, because I know if you want to go fast, you go alone. But we can't keep it at a slow pace that we're at.
No, we're not moving fast enough, but I think the millennials will make sure that we get a lot of gas behind us.
Okay, all right. There we go. Maria, let's get your closing thoughts on this.
I think as mining moves towards future-proofing and sustainability, one thing that really needs to come to the table is collaboration. There must be collaboration not only within industry, because why must we keep on making the same mistakes? If somebody else has made the mistake, let us learn from each other's mistakes. So collaboration within industry, but definitely also collaboration from governments. There must be a political will and government driving some of the environments for us to do faster changes, for us to have more effective skills transfer, and create an environment where people would want to come in and invest and really help to drive that transition. And I think there's quite a need for us to have a complete mind shift about what is mining in South Africa, in the African context. Because everybody says, yes, we've got all of this labor, but yes, we have all of this labor, but we have all of this potential as well. So definitely a need for a mind shift, and also integrating a lot of diversity within your workforce, because then you bring in new ideas that will probably help you shift it faster.
Absolutely. And finally, let's leave the word with you, Kasan.
Yeah, I think there's some good lessons from history for us, because if you, and I'm gonna go way old stuff now, but if you think about when you went from the horse and cart to the automobile, there were jobs lost, right?
Yeah.
Because you had the people did the horseshoes, the cleanup, and all of that, but there were jobs gained. If you look at moving from typewriter to computer, same thing. But what's interesting about that is that you went from a distributed employment thing to more concentrated. Automotive industry, Germany, Detroit, Japan, you know, the computer industry, Silicon Valley, etc. And this is a similar situation. So we need to think, how can we be part of the new landscape, rather than, okay, let's hold on to the previous, because there will be opportunities, but we need to make sure it's here.
Yeah, and it's so important, and I always quote this interview that I did with, it was the beginning of last year, and we did this whole thing on AI, and we had this wonderful opportunity to interview will.i.am, and he was being zoomed in as like one of those virtual reality kind of things, like he was standing on the stage, we were talking to him, and these are one of the questions that we brought up, is that, you know, he said, well, for him, I mean, obviously, all industries are going to be disrupted. It doesn't matter who you are; everyone's going to be disrupted. But he gave a nice example of a family that relied on making jerseys and how they would hand knit, and that would be what the jerseys are. But then technology came along, and of course, it was mass production of jerseys, mass production which created more jobs. Yes, they still knitted jerseys, but that wasn't it. It was on a bigger scale. So you didn't lose jobs, you created more jobs. But we need to push on the skills to ensure that our communities can benefit from all of this. But really interesting. We'll see how it goes, but it sounds like we've got a lot of work ahead of us. It really does. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you so much for your inputs on this particular panel. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Maria Kombrink, Agisan, and Rajan Govender as well. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your time. All right, so, gosh, we've been really motoring it through all of this and talking about so many different aspects of this green future and the sustainability of all of it. So, let me just ask our panelists, please grab your, there's a little gift bag for you, so please don't walk away without taking that. So, I am now going to take a nice rest. I'm looking forward to this particular panel discussion, because this is the one I was telling you a little bit about, is how we are now going to be looking at electric vehicles. And the topic is sustainable mobility, driving the green transition with EVs. So I am not going to tell you more about it. What I'm going to do is call George Minnie, who's the CEO of Auto Trader SA, and he is going to invite his guests up to have this conversation and delve a little bit more into it. Thank you so much. Nice to see you, George. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. And first thing I'd like to do is invite my guests up. First guest is Yusuf Norath. Yusuf, if you can come up to the panel, and Riando Potgieter. And while they're coming up, I'd like to start off with a little bit of a construct. And that construct is, I'd like to leave you with 5 thoughts leading into the questions that I'm going to ask these 2 very smart gentlemen. And the first is, sit here right next to me so that you can get comfortable. The first is, it's crucial to really recognize and to highlight the fact that there's a significant impact that the automotive industry in any country, South Africa included, plays in sustainability. It plays a substantial role in the degradation of our environment. Okay, so that's kind of construct number 1. How does a century-old industry transition? Over 100 years of doing the same things we did yesterday. The second thing I want to kind of put into this framework for you is we have to acknowledge the unique challenges and opportunities within the automotive industry. There are unique challenges to disrupt this industry is significant. As a small example, an internal combustion engine vehicle has 2,000 moving parts. An electric vehicle has maybe 200. How much of the value chain are we disrupting by moving to electric vehicles? And I believe in moving to electric vehicles, so I'm not making an argument to not. So we've got to recognize that the move towards electric vehicles or alternative fuel sources has significant opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases, but it's also a significant disruption. And the fourth part of this construct I want to leave with you, or introduce to you, should I say, is sustainable mobility is the new kid on the block. It's the new buzzword, sustainable mobility. But quite often, the consumer gets ignored in sustainable mobility. Because before we start to really understand and drive the preferences of the consumer, what they want, the things they want, to change the single underlying driver for their choices, which is their daily lives and lifestyles. I call it the vulgar mechanics of cash. Because only when we change that will the consumer make these sorts of choices. So thank you for staying for the graveyard shift and and for listening to this panel. And getting into the construct of the panel itself. As Africa approaches 2030, we all know what 2030 is about, EVs are increasingly in the spotlight. And so I'm going to delve into some thought-provoking questions with my two learned colleagues over here, exploring the merits of EVs and contemplating the potential of green hydrogen or fully battery electric vehicles, and what the path is to a more sustainable future of transportation. So my name is George Minnie, as I was introduced to be the CEO of Auto Trader, but I also drive an electric vehicle. For the last 3 years, I took it upon myself as a leader in our industry to go first, and I encourage other leaders to do exactly the same. So today with me, on my left, I've got Riando Potgieter, I said that right? Operations Director for Aversa, and then Yusuf Norath, I said that right too, right? Yes. A National Franchise Operations Manager, Takealot.com, which is also a Naspers company. Correct. Yes, as well as Auto Trader is a Naspers company. So my first question is to you, Yusuf. How do you think government's strategy outlined in our recent 2024 budget speech will impact last mile delivery, which Takealot does a lot of, for online retailers such as Takealot.com, and your approach to potential investment into greener solutions?
Thanks, George. Oh, mic is working, thank you. So firstly, I want to apologize up front. When our honorable minister was delivering his budget speech, I was busy learning how to rollerblade. Actually missed that. But yeah, read up on it afterwards and got some feedback on that. So, I mean, there's 4 key points that to me make sense in terms of how the changeover from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, more importantly, moving towards sustainability, and how that impacts the online retailers or last mile delivery specifically, and how we change our approach to investing in that. And I think the key one and the most important one that stood out for me was the fact that government is, of course, now looking at the introduction of, sorry, I just made some notes, the investment into companies that start manufacturing electric vehicles locally. And I think the most important thing with that is, with the cost of electric vehicles in South Africa, cost of electric vehicles in general in South Africa, it's overly expensive. And companies are not willing to invest or to spend money on purchasing these vehicles because it's just too expensive. It costs a lot of money to import it into the country. So with the vehicles now being manufactured locally, being manufactured in South Africa, a reduced cost, which means we can invest in this, and our investment is not going into an area that we don't see benefit out of it. Then, of course, when we talk about investment, where do we find the money to invest into greener solutions? And I think that every single company thinks on the same point. So, I mean, there's two key things that government has outlined in the budget speech specifically. The one was the no change in the fuel levy. To a company like Takealot, who is last mile delivery and, of course, drivers on the road every single day, we have to invest into ever-changing rates to drivers as and when the fuel price goes up. I mean, it's not just the annual price increases that we see to drivers, but more importantly, with the fuel that's fluctuating over and over again, these fuel levies impact us negatively because from our bottom line, we of course need to ensure that the driver is still sustainable. So by the reduction or the no change in the fuel levy, of course, we therefore then have a bit of a saving whereby we can then utilize this to invest into greener solutions. And then lastly, the other one that I just touched point on was the adaptation of the roadmap around land freight and the introduction of that. And I think what's another key point there is, once again, with the outline to change the way that we utilize land and land freight from between provinces and the transporting of stock, again, for an online retailer like Takealot, where we've got distribution centers across the country, it saves us, again, from a cost perspective. And all of that saving, once again, goes into investing into greener solutions.
Well, I mean, I think what you're highlighting here is that a lot of the solution is going to be left up to, which probably happens around the world all too often, is going to be left up to corporate businesses, and it's nice to see that Takealot's going to take those savings and reinvest it into greener technologies and
I think
greener
that's
solutions.
important. It's extremely important that we don't just see it as a saving on our bottom line. It's how do we utilize this money to further sustain the country and, more importantly, adapt greener solutions.
So next question is to you, Riondo, and EVs and hydrogen. I almost said EVs versus hydrogen, because some people kind of argue that one is better than the other. But EVs and hydrogen, in terms of policy drivers to incorporate both of these technologies into logistics industries, tell us a little bit about the core fundamental differences and which technologies companies should be investing in.
I think it's a very good question, and I'm going to try and break down a very complicated engineering construct in a way in which we can understand it in business. So when you look at hydrogen or EV, it's important to understand that they're both electric vehicles. We refer to hydrogen vehicles as something on its own, but it's not. Your wheels are still turned by an electric motor. So understanding that principle in itself, what's the core difference between the two? You sitting with a gas tank in the one and a large battery in the other, but your energy density, i.e. how far you can drive on the same sort of size of a battery, is very different. In a hydrogen vehicle, you can drive very far compared to an EV that might have a range of around 300 to 400 kilometers. So that might sound quite arbitrary on the face of it, because why would we want something that can't drive from here to Cape Town in one go? It's like you said, we're trying to reconstruct the way in which we think about logistics to start off with. It's an industry that's been with us for 100 years and it hasn't changed much. So where does hydrogen play to its strengths and where does EV play to its strengths? Hydrogen tends to play very, very well into its strengths where there's a lot of energy-hungry machines. Mining is a fantastic example of that. Large machines needing to guzzle up diesel. Hydrogen is well suited for that sort of application. EVs, on the other hand, for last mile distribution, does particularly well, because every time that a truck comes back to a warehouse, in the middle of the day, it can dock onto the warehouse and charge whilst there's solar available. So a range of 200 to 300 kilometers per charge comes into more than enough range in a day if you can consider a quick 30-minute to an hour lunchtime charge. So second to that, or thirdly, I would say that we need to understand that hydrogen is always going to remain a lot more expensive than straight battery usage. And the reason for that is to make hydrogen is an incredibly energy-intensive game. And if we try and simplify it down, if you drive 1 kilometer in a battery electric vehicle, versus 1 kilometer in a hydrogen-powered vehicle, you're going to sit with around 3 times more energy at the source of your hydrogen. That means that you need 3 times more energy to drive the same distance. So for any application where you are not needing to consume an enormous amount of energy, like for instance planes, trains, large trucks, or mining equipment, it does seem like batteries are the option. That being said, both camps in the world are spending an enormous amount of money in R&D to, A, bring the cost of hydrogen down, because its application goes long past just logistics. You can do smelting with it, mining in general. And on the other side, the battery camp is really putting incredible technology out into the market. To expect an electric vehicle to be able to drive double as far as what we see now and charge in half the time within 3 to 5 years from now is not out of the question. To drive from here to Cape Town and charge once on the route is not going to be out of the question. So the last pull of wisdom, I think that large corporates, and especially the management of those corporates, need to keep in mind is that any battery electric vehicle gives us a very unique opportunity for sovereignty on our energy. If I told you, or if I asked you, as a fleet owner, can you remember what your fuel price used to be 10 years ago? Imagine just adjusting that for inflation, you're still paying the same price. That is what battery electric vehicles can offer you. If you can supply your own energy to your fleet, you can fix your energy price. And that's a substantial thing to reckon with. And that's something that hydrogen can't really afford you. I hope that...
Yeah, so I mean, the two things I got out of that really was that it isn't EV, or should I say battery, lithium-ion versus hydrogen. It is very application dependent. And then the second thing I got out of that was, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to the technology advancement, because who knows what will happen to even hydrogen in the next 10 years. So I think maybe over to you again, Yusuf. What should business leaders know before switching to EVs or even other green technologies?
So, I mean, I'll talk specifically to the EVs that Takealot within our Takealot group has been looking at. Rhino will be able to speak more specifically to our DC distributions, to our hub, our residential distribution centers. They've partnered with us and have been working quite closely with our teams around the trucks and the electric vehicles that we have on the road. But when it comes to the last mile delivery, specifically from our residential distribution centers to the customer's door, or in the space of Mr. D with the motorbike drivers who are collecting from restaurants and delivering to customers, I think the key aspect is education. And we've, over the last few years, have been looking at various opportunities, specifically with the two-wheeler electric vehicles, trying to convert our independent contractor drivers who utilize the two-wheeler motorbikes to deliver to the customer's door, whether they're collecting from a restaurant and delivering to the customer's door, or do the last mile delivery on behalf of Takealot Superbalist, as an example. Trying to convert them from their internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. And they look at the cost factor, because at the end of the day, it's their pocket that's being impacted.
Vulgar mechanics of cash, right?
100%. And it's trying to educate them around the fact that, yes, I understand that weekly you're paying, if you are renting the vehicle, weekly you're currently paying around 650 Rand to rent an internal combustion engine motorbike. But changing over to an electric vehicle is probably going to cost you around about 1,500 Rand. He doesn't see that as a cost saving, because all he sees is I'm moving from 650 to almost double the amount. What he doesn't understand is with the internal combustion engine, there's fuel that you still got to pay for out of your pocket over and above the rental. There's the maintenance on the vehicle. And we know for a fact that the internal combustion engines require much more maintenance than your electric vehicles. Because electric vehicles is something so new, and it's the higher end market who understand it a bit more than the individuals who are the middle income to low income earners who are operating on these platforms and delivering it. It makes it difficult for them to understand that in the long term there is definite savings. And I think that's the most important thing, is the education around it.
Rianda?
I would say data. At least in our experience, what we have seen in all the trials that we've been running with numerous fleets is that the assumptions that the top management have about the technology when we meet with them for the first time versus the way in which they talk and think about the rollout is completely different after we've done trials. And it comes back to the data, being able to prove to drivers that at the end of the day, the benefit could be in their pocket. How we communicate and how we train on that needs to link back to tangible data.
So that kind of, you're speaking about top management, probably big companies, but from an entrepreneurial point of view, because I think, Yusuf, you alluded to it, is, drivers think about next month, the month after, and entrepreneurs thinking exactly the same way. They're trying to keep the lights on. So what are the immediate opportunities for entrepreneurs who are in smaller businesses with sustainable solutions?
I think the easiest route is around partnering with the right service provider. There are multiple service providers that offer these types. So if I look at last mile space as an example, specifically, if you are an individual who wants to look at operating a fleet and renting out a fleet of vehicles, I think it's the infrastructure is the most important thing. If I look at Green Riders as an example, and I'm not sure if you're very familiar with Green Riders and the project that they're busy running at the moment. Green Riders has tried to not necessarily focusing specifically on electric-powered or battery-powered motorbikes, but move towards the pedal-assist electric bicycles. And what they've done is, they've set up infrastructure in the areas where they feel that they will blossom. So if you look at the Tableview region in the Western Cape as an example, where they started out this project, they set up a full infrastructure where it allows an individual who's renting a bike from them to come and charge the battery overnight or charge the battery during the course of your downtime. They've then expanded their network into providing other alternatives besides the bike. What are the tools of trade that's required for you to be a driver? So that type of infrastructure and setup is key, and that's where you'll get the best benefit out of it.
Leander?
I can think of a list.
Let's take the top three.
So, auto electricians are vitally important for electric vehicles. I can tell you countless stories where we've had challenges where there's just simply not a skill base for electric vehicles, especially in the auto electrical space, to do troubleshooting on these vehicles. And that learning curve has been very steep in all of the OEMs that do supply these vehicles. So it's a tremendous opportunity for a lot of people to be upskilled. On the charger side, the installation of chargers, the maintenance of chargers, the software related to that, for all service stations to install a charger or two, service, cater for that market. It is a market that is about to blossom, and there's a lot of opportunity beckoning.
So staying with you for a second, Riondo, can you share with us some opportunities and benefits that your business has identified that any entrepreneur could potentially consider?
That's a good question. So we founded Aversa in 2020, and fantastic year to start a business, and especially in a completely new technology industry. I would invite more companies to take the risk, because what we saw just yesterday, I went to the Solar Expo yesterday, and it was astounding to me how far China has gotten in the renewable space. We've got a strong automotive manufacturing sector, and there's so much opportunity for this country to be able to make so much revenue from that. So start EV businesses, EV-related businesses. If you have a business that has got some influence in the automotive space, how can you leverage that to either make EVs locally, repower EVs, service EVs, or install the ecosystem that powers it?
I guess be part of the value chain. Yusuf?
I think from our side, with last mile specifically, is partnering with the right service provider, as I mentioned earlier. So if we look at, and I alluded to Green Riders earlier, and the opportunity that they have. So Green Riders has done a fantastic thing where it's not just trying to get electric bikes onto the road, but more importantly, they're also looking at the unemployment factor in our country, that, as we know, is sitting 30-40% at the moment. So what Green Riders is doing is they are approaching Takealot and saying, we've got 10, 20, 30 unemployed youth willing to learn, wanting to create an opportunity for them to earn an income. And it's not a matter of them being employed, but it's more of a factor of them engaging with them and skilling them to be a future entrepreneur. Greenride is providing the skills. Take a Lot with them is providing the opportunity for this individual to learn the skill and further enhance the earning opportunity. Over and above that, to Reno's point, is around the companies that started to get involved in electric vehicles. Another company that we've recently started engaging with is Authentically. You know, in the last year and a half, I have engaged with so many service providers around electric motorbikes and trying to get this platform running within the Take Lot space or the last mile delivery space. And you need to have the right mindset. You also need to know that you're probably going to burn your fingers. But you need to get through it and see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I was dealing with a company where we were on the verge of getting on something and having a deal signed, and they just suddenly went silent. What happened? Not sure. I've heard via the grapevine that it just fell through the walkway. But Alternative is a company that we've recently been engaging. But what they've done is, before approaching us, they've set up the infrastructure, they've tested the infrastructure works. And then they've got a fantastic opportunity where they see that the individual that's riding the motorbike on last mile delivery doesn't have the opportunity to plug in his bike and wait for it to charge for 20, 30 minutes or an hour for him to do his next 5 deliveries. So they started partnering with the likes of Shell or shopping centers where they put up battery swap-out stations. As an independent contractor who's driving a motorbike, it's just like filling up fuel. Pop up there, swap out my battery for a fully charged battery, and carry on with the rest of the day.
I like that topic of battery swapping. It's something that I've been thinking more and more and more about. But back to you, Riondo, and sticking to the topic. What are the risks of not adopting greener technologies?
Let's try and break it down to a Company A or a Company B example. Company A stuck to diesel for the next 5 years. They didn't integrate any EVs into their fleet. Company B integrated some EVs into their fleet, and you spoke a little bit earlier about the steep learning curve. It can't be underestimated. Integrating EVs into your business is not just putting a diesel truck in and it will work. There's a lot of things that people need to learn about this technology. And what will inevitably happen is that Company B might do a fleet changeover of 4 to 7% per annum. In 5 years' time, when they sit on 20 to 30% EVs in their fleet, they'll start to see a cost difference in running, which will give them a competitive advantage to the company that hasn't started their transition yet. Think of EVs as solar. There's 2 times that solar would have been absolutely ideal, right now and 3 years ago. Had you installed solar 3 years ago, the accumulated savings that you would have seen on that would just have increased year by year. And we're seeing exactly the same thing with EVs. From the first trucks that we brought in, we've seen a gradual curve coming down with the break-even point getting lower and lower. And that's with the rand-dollar exchange getting higher, or like worse and worse. So it has to speak for something. Something's working. And I would invite everyone to adopt a Company B mentality. Get some vehicles, start the learning process. You don't want to be a Company A.
Yusuf?
I don't think I have anything more to add. Really answer the question to the best.
Well, I suppose that's a tipping point, right?
It's the tipping point.
It's a tipping point.
Specifically to that point, I mean, if I look at prior to being the National Franchise Operations Manager, I was in driver operations, and prior to that, I was in a different role. But coming into driver operations, there was this opportunity for us to get involved in EV. And if I had not taken that opportunity a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have understood the industry as much as I understand it now, and the challenges that come with it. And what we need to get onto from a ground perspective is to understand it and the learnings that come with it. So when you do implement, or in the future when you face challenges, electric vehicles in your business creates an operational havoc, if I can put it that way. I mean, Rhino alluded to it earlier, where he mentioned the fact that some have the opportunity of charging in between trips. But it means that changing the way you look at your operations. And that's a big challenge, because if you're not open to change, you're never going to be successful with it, and you're continuously going to see it as a challenge. So if you don't get into it now, you're not going to be able, in smaller portions, again to the point, starting off at 7-10% of your fleet and expanding as you move along. Going in it one shot and just changing everything, it's going to create a havoc and a nightmare for you. But the opportunity to get in from the beginning and slowly evolve allows you to learn and adapt your business to benefit from this electric vehicles.
So final question for the both of you, and that is, a little bit of the other side of the coin. What other policies and legislation do we need to see in order to facilitate the adoption of greener transportation? Let's go for you first, Riando.
I suppose that NAMSA has been fighting the battle for a few years now to try and get legislation passed for the import tax on EVs to be lowered for a certain amount of time in order for us to build the critical mass that's required for charging infrastructure in the country. If we look at a household brand like Tesla, for instance, they didn't start selling vehicles before they had a substantial charging network or a substantial enough charging network rolled out. Now, there's a number of companies working on charging networks in the country, but what they need is clients. And you're not going to make clients locally because we don't make EVs yet, firstly. And secondly, the local OEMs won't make EVs because there's no market yet. And the reason there's no market yet is because the local EV price is just too high. And you won't have any consumer confidence until you have a charging network that can inspire you driving without having range anxiety and not knowing if you need to power your house or your vehicle, you know. That's my take on it.
And Yusuf, I mean, I think...
I spoke about it earlier. It's the exact same thing. I mean, last week, I was just looking at the price of two different vehicles, where the one costs, I think, 150,000 Rand less than the other, and the sole difference between the two of them is it's electric. And it all comes down to the import taxes that we pay on it. In the same space with independent contractor who do the last mile delivery from restaurant to customer, as an example, they want to be a part of it. They love the technology on the bikes. They love the fact that if I look at my dashboard, I can see a lot more. I can see how much of kilometers I've done. I can see how much of my battery usage is impacted when I pull the throttle completely. You know, and they love it, but the fact is that they can't afford it. And as much as they want to get onto it, they just can't afford it. And that's the challenge that we face. We need these import prices to come down. The other small part of it is the fact that lithium-ion batteries are so expensive. Again, it's the import taxes on it. A lot of these vehicles require their batteries to be changed at some point, and that's the other side of the coin. The vehicle is fine to run, but at some stage that battery is going to need to be replaced. The battery costs us almost the same price as the bike, if not more. So again, we need those import taxes to come down. I think it will solve a lot of problems.
So, 25% down to 18%, because that's what it costs to import an ICE vehicle, 25% to import an electric vehicle. And then a very big bugbear of mine is that we export all of our minerals, we let it get manufactured on the other side of the ocean, 100%. And then we import it again to be used here. So, there's something to be said about actually producing batteries within South Africa. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I'll try and share maybe 3 quick points that just links onto what was said on the previous talk about mining. We should change the way in which we look at carbon-based fuel sources, coal, gas, oil. It's not that we're going to live in a world where we all of a sudden stop mining coal, stop drilling for oil, stop using gas. Those resources are incredibly valuable and not valuable in the way in which we're using them now. They're not valuable to burn. Plastics as a material has fundamentally changed the way in which we are able to live in society. Healthcare is just one but many examples of it. And if we keep on destroying a finite resource, at some point we're going to run into a problem because it's finite. And the last is that if you think that fuel or diesel or petrol is going to get cheaper, try and think of one example where a finite resource in this world didn't increase in value. I think you'll be hard-pressed to find that.
Good final words. Yusuf?
I think from my side, just one other thing is, we evolved. We evolved from the horse and cart to the internal combustion engine. And yes, sitting here, I mentioned quite a few challenges that we face as we try to evolve from internal combustion to electric vehicles. But the change is coming, and it's important that we adopt to it, and we are open-minded into the challenges that we face, and more importantly, we collaborate on how we can overcome the challenges that we face and see the success of this in our country.
From your mouth to everyone's ears. Big round of applause for the two panelists. Thank you very much, Riando, Yusuf.
All right. Well, what a wonderful way to end the conference and today's session. I must say, I think it is imperative that we start making these changes, and we heard this, but we've got a long way to go to ensure that that we can get this sorted and in a very swift way without breaking down on our way somewhere. So, you know, the world is changing, and it's changing exceptionally fast. And I must say, this conference, The Future of Sustainability, is possibly one of the most important conversations that we need to have. There are many conversations, but sustainability in this day and age is exactly what we need to be talking about. Once again, thank you so much to all of our sponsors for putting their efforts and their name and their money behind this: Coca-Cola Beverages South Africa, OMI Solutions, the SPA Group, the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, Envision Advisory Services, Nestle, the South African National Breweries, Amalulu, and Old Mutual Insure. Thank you very, very much for being wonderful and remarkable partners during this journey with us. And then, of course, also those that are our event partners: the UN Global Compact Network for South Africa, Good Governance Africa, National Business Initiative, Prime Media Outdoor, Mail and Guardian, Channel Africa, Women in Mining South Africa, and AICPA and CIMA. Thank you very, very much, as well as Business Tech Africa. So this is pretty much so where I wrap things and allow you to enjoy, if you would like to still mingle, get together, chat, see if there's anything else you'd like to elaborate on. But it's been an absolute pleasure and an enlightening day for me. I actually can't believe how fast it's gone. It really has been fantastic being a part of this. So for this year, we say goodbye, God bless, and we look forward to the same and hopefully a lot more innovations that will be done in this year of 2024. Thank you, everybody. Drive safely.